back in the office. None of them are women, mind you. And would like to, for your comfort, we do have a water closet in the back room if you need it. Also, at the end of the meeting, in the stairwell out behind you here, we have some refreshments. Would invite you to partake. And what else? Oh yes, Saturday at 1 p.m., Saturday afternoon, we'll be conducting a tour of Mount Hope Cemetery. It's a Halloween and Irish sort of gig. And our good friend Cornelius Murphy will be leading us. And invite you all to attend. It's rain or shine, and just show up at the gate, 81 Mount Hope Avenue. So, this evening's speaker. He needs no introduction, so we won't give him one. Tonight, our speaker will be Douglas Hodgkin. Professor Hodgkin is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Bates College. And he has a long and distinguished list of works that he has written and published. Some of the recent titles that you might be familiar with, When Presidents and Hopefuls Came to Town, Lewiston and Auburn, the Lewiston and Auburn Railroad Company, 1872 to 2009, the Baptists of Court Street, Auburn, Maine, Frontier to Industrial City, Lewiston Town Government and Politics, 1770 to 1863, and the list goes on. Doug is the Janus Elder of our time and then some, our resident Lewiston historian. And this evening, Doug will be speaking on the local party upheaval in the period just before the Civil War. Without further ado, please make welcome Doug Hodgkin.
Thank you very much. Well, there are people who are still interested in politics, at least pre-Civil War politics. I was wondering, given the testimony that I've been hearing, that people are sick of politics there. And this was something on the local news that Kathy Mateo, the city clerk in Lewiston, was saying that people want to vote now, and then they don't have to pay much attention anymore, because they're sick and tired of everything about politics. But politics is with us, and tonight we're looking at the history of what happened just before the Civil War, looking at what was happening nationally, looking at what was happening in the state, and particularly looking at what was happening in Atchison County. We look at this because this was when the Republican Party was founded, and this led to Lincoln's election. Lincoln's election was a catalyst, at least, for the secession of the South, and then we got into the Civil War. So this is part of our series of programs that we're conducting about the Civil War, interspersed with other topics. We should also, I was going to mention what happens next month in November, or next month in November we will be having a topic about economic development, as it was recorded in Maine by Winston. Okay. I've forgotten your name. Grayton, yes, Winston Grayton is going to be giving that presentation. Okay, let's get underway. In the late 1840s and early 1850s, there were several issues that were disrupting the political alignments. The two major parties, the Democratic Party and the Whig Party, were trying to negotiate among these issues of nativism, that is the Know Nothing movement, the anti-Irish, anti-German movement, the temperance movement, or the prohibition movement. It went from temperance to outright prohibition, and then the slavery issue. And so these were the issues primarily that were disrupting the old party alignments. This is somewhat in contrast with today, that we always seem to have the two parties fairly firm bases and not too much apparent crossover between them. At least it's testified that we had only a small number of undecideds in this election. In the 1840s, the Whig Party was somewhat more in favor of temperance, against alcohol. The Democrats somewhat more likely against the temperance movement, although, as I say, they had elements in both of the parties in favor of temperance. And then there also was a small Liberty Party that focused on the slavery issue, and were practically all in favor of temperance or prohibition of the sale of liquor. In 1846 and in 1848, the Liberty Party won enough votes to prevent any candidate from having a majority for governor of the state of Maine. And at that time, and for several years, the Maine legislature determined who the governor would be if no one had an absolute majority. So it was thrown into the state legislature, and they did elect the Democratic candidate who had the plurality of the votes, had more votes than anyone else. But the Liberty Party won a few seats in the legislature, although not many. One notable instance was Gideon Perkins of Lewiston, who won as a temperance or a Liberty candidate in 1842. He was the only member of the legislature of that party, and he was a Free Will Baptist minister. And this movement, this Liberty Party, was primarily a very religious movement, and many ministers were sympathetic to that party. However, in some legislative districts, the Liberty Party created difficulties because the elections were held in town meetings. You didn't just go cast your vote and go away. You had a town meeting at a particular time and place, and there, again, a majority vote was required. This was particularly a problem if you had multi-town districts, because you didn't know what was happening in the other towns when you had your votes on that day. And so, okay, so Lewiston and Lisbon were in the same legislative district in the 1840s. Lewiston wasn't a big city by any means, and so it was you had to take Lisbon and Lewiston together to constitute a legislative district. Well, they met several times. In fact, they had 8 town meetings in order to select their candidate for the legislature. So the first 2 lines are the dates: 11th of September, 2nd of October, 23rd of October, and so on. They had to keep meetings because no one got a majority. Hezekiah Durrington was the Liberty Party candidate, and he had a good solid base that stuck with him through thick and thin. But other candidates dropped out, and additional candidates came in to contest the seat over time. There are a couple times, if you're quick with your maths, there are a couple times where Lewiston did cast a majority to put someone, but the Lisbon people prevented a majority in the entire district. So it wasn't until the 5th of February, when the legislature was already underway, that they were able to finally elect Horace Corbett as their member of the legislature. This is going on throughout the state, and eventually the legislature dropped the requirement for a majority. He said, whoever wins, comes in first, will take the seat. Prohibition was the initial issue that really split the Democratic Party, or the preference of prohibition. There were two pretty solid factions in the Democratic Party. The prohibition the Woolhead faction, and the anti-prohibition Wildcats. They were called the Wildcats, as you will see, were bolted from initially, and the Wildcats called the Woolheads as a term. Frequently, they're called in a pejorative sense, and the Woolheads were these old farmers who were sticking with temperance and prohibition and so on. It was. I should also mention that the nominations for office were made by conventions, state conventions, district conventions, local party caucuses, county conventions, district conventions, wherever you had these nominations having to be done, it was done by these conventions. No primaries. No primaries. They are late 19th century. This issue split the Democrats, particularly when the Woolhead Democrat, who had won the 1850 election, signed a bill prohibiting the sale of liquor. He signed this in 1851. And in 1852, he gained renomination, but the Wildcats bolted the convention and chose another candidate, so that there were two Democratic candidates running for the office. So I'll explain to you what this is. The first set of bars are the Democratic Party, and you see that this is, the Democratic Party, and then the Whig Party are the next set of bars, and the Free Soil Party. By this time, the Free Soil Party has absorbed the Liberty Party, and then finally other candidates. But you see, and then the 1850 are the blue, 1852 the red, 1853 the green, and the purple for 1854. And you see that This red is 1852, when you had two Democratic candidates running. And in 1853, John Hubbard, the incumbent governor, did not receive his party nomination, so I think he ran, let me check. Okay, he ran, okay, no, they nominated someone else. Let's just see what initially happened here. Basically, the big point of this is that this is the Free Soil Party for the first 3 bars, and then in 1854 something happened so that a new party, which ultimately became known as the Republican Party, absorbed that faction and got votes from the other parties. It's probably better just to take the names of the candidates. Hubbard, in 1850, a Woolhead Democrat, won the nomination and the general election. There was no election in 1851 because of changes in the election calendar. So Hubbard had a little extra time in office, actually. And then in 1852, Hubbard won renomination. The Wildcats bolted the party, nominated Chandler, and then the Whigs had Crosby, and the Free Soil candidate was Holmes. And Crosby was elected governor because no one had a majority, and the legislature had enough people, a few Free Soil people, some Wildcats who wouldn't go for Hubbard, and then regular Whig party members of the legislature coalesced and elected Crosby, even though he had only 30+% of the vote in the general election. And then the same thing happened in the next year when Crosby again won the governorship versus Pillsbury, who's now the wild card, who won the nomination in 1853, and so got regular Democrats as well as those who were against the Woolheads. And then Anson Morrill was the so-called nominee of the Bolters from that party, and then Holmes again. Then in 1854, a sudden break occurred. With the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was largely passed by the Democrats in Congress. This repealed the Missouri Compromise, provided that Kansas and Nebraska could be admitted to the Union according to a popular vote as to how they, whether slavery would be permitted in their state. Also, the bill included a Fugitive Slave Act that required the return of slaves and made it a crime to assist them. So if you assisted an escaped slave, then you were subject to prosecution also. In the North, both parties were split over this issue. The Woolheads tended to be in anti-slavery, and the Wildcats in favor slavery at least, would permit each state to make their own decision. And the Whigs were split over the issue. In Maine, however, there was great indignation about the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And in the state, all over the state, on June 10th, mass meetings in 1854, mass meetings were held. Many speeches were made. Resolutions were passed in these meetings endorsing the Maine law, that is the Prohibition law, and denouncing the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and supporting Anson P. Morrill for governor. Anson P. Morrill was the Democratic candidate, the Woolhead Democratic candidate in 1853. The Democrats in their state convention, June 24th, chose Albion K. Harris. The Whigs chose Isaac Reed in early July. The Free Soil Party nominated Anson P. Morrill. The Free Soil Party also changed its name to be the American and Maine Liberty Party. Morrill was also endorsed by the State Convention of Temperance People and by the Know Nothing Party. So there's quite a coalition here. Essentially, a lot of Whigs, a lot of Democrats, the Free Soil Party, and Know Nothings, who came from each of the different parties, endorsed Morrill. And he was the one who had that major spike with the purple bar in 1854. It wasn't really the Republican Party yet in the summer of 1854. Now, local Whigs, Free Soilers, and Temperance People engaged in negotiations all over the state to make nominations for county offices. We had these different candidates, Democrats, Whigs, American and the Maine Liberty Party, at the state level. But the politicians were uneasy at this free-for-all that was going on. They weren't sure exactly how it would shake out in terms of the votes in September. We were voting in September. These negotiations were occurring. It was most successful to put forth a slate in Franklin County, or at least they were the earliest, and this was held in the town of Strong, and Strong makes claims that they are the birthplace of the Republican Party, not Ripon, Wisconsin. So they have a claim. This was going on all over the North, these kinds of negotiations. Okay, what happened in 1854? Well, in mid-August, the Whig convention assembled in Union Hall on Lisbon Street. I haven't really been able to pinpoint exactly where that hall was, but that was the designation in the newspaper. The Free Soilers assembled in Auburn Hall on Court Street, simultaneously, the same day. The Whigs had their people. Reed, Chase, Warren for the county commission, Goddard for the county attorney, Pulsford for clerk of courts, Hayes for treasurer. The Free Soilers had their candidates. I couldn't find any mention of any particular candidate for county attorney. Negotiations occurred, and the Whig Party sent a delegation to Lisbon Street to the Free Soil Convention, suggesting this preliminary slate, so I named preliminary slate. And so Small was the Free Soil candidate, and then Perkins and Kilborn